The Whitmore Foundation Gala for Children's Literacy had been arranged for 600 people, and 600 people had agreed, without being asked, to behave as though the only child in the room was the one being featured in the campaign video playing on the screen above the stage. At a small round table near the back wall of the ballroom, not quite in the overflow section, not quite in the main floor, the kind of table that exists at every formal event to absorb the people the seating chart did not know what to do with, a 7-year-old boy sat with his hands folded in the lap of his too large suit jacket and watched the room the way a child watches a room when he has had a great deal of practice doing it alone. His name was Oliver Ashby. He was 7 years old and 4 months. He had come that evening with his grandmother, who was at that moment 3 tables away with her back to him, in deep and animated conversation with a woman in a red blazer who had, from the moment she sat down, not stopped talking. His grandmother had seated him, smoothed his collar, said 2 minutes, sweetheart, and had not since then looked back. That had been an hour and 25 minutes ago. Oliver had counted by the large clock above the entrance doors. He had also counted the number of adults who had passed his table without speaking to him, 17. He had counted the number of times a waiter had brought something past at a height he could not reach without standing, 4. He had counted the number of times someone had glanced at him, registered that he was alone and looked away, 6. He did not look lonely. He had learned not to look lonely. He sat with his hands folded and his back straight the way his grandmother had asked him to, and he watched. He was watching the centerpiece, a tall arrangement of white tulips that had started the evening upright and were now beginning slowly to lean, when the woman in the dark green dress arrived at his table. She had not come from the direction of the bar or the entrance. She had come from the far corridor, the one that led to the hotel's back offices, and she was walking with the specific quick step of a person who had just finished something and was deciding what to do next. She was not scanning the room for someone she knew. She was not carrying a drink or a program or a phone. She stopped at the edge of the table, not too close. And then she did something that Oliver had not seen any of the 17 adults do. She crouched down. Not leaned forward, not bent at the waist with her hands on her knees. She crouched all the way down so that her face was level with his one knee on the carpet, the skirt of the green dress arranged sideways out of her own way, and she said nothing for a moment. She just looked at him, not the way adults look at a child they are assessing, the way one person looks at another person they have noticed is carrying something. Hi, she said, is anyone sitting in this chair? Oliver looked at the empty chair beside him. His grandmother's program booklet was on the seat. He picked it up and set it on the table. No, he said. May I sit for a minute? He considered this with the careful seriousness of a 7-year-old who has been told more than once not to talk to strangers, weighed it against the specific loneliness of the last hour and 25 minutes and said, yes. She sat. She did not take the chair across from him, which would have put the table between them and required him to look up. She took the one beside him, turned it a few degrees so they were angled toward each other rather than toward the room, and sat in the unhurried way of a person who had decided, without announcement, to stay for a while. I'm Callum, he said, and then corrected himself immediately. Oliver, my nan calls me Callum sometimes, that's her nickname. Which do you prefer tonight? He thought about it. Oliver. Oliver, she said, as if she were placing the name somewhere careful. I'm Tessa. She did not tell him what she did. She did not ask what grade he was in or what his favorite subject was. She looked at the centerpiece. The tulips are going, she said. Oliver looked at them. They've been doing that since 7:30. I think it's the heat from the stage lights. They come in refrigerated and then the room does this to them. How do you know? I grew up near a flower market. My mother ran a stall on Saturdays. She glanced at him sideways. Not very exciting. What have you been watching all evening? Oliver considered the question. Adults did not usually ask him what he had been watching. They asked him how school was going. The waiter with the tray of cheese, he said. He's been past 4 times and he always goes too fast to stop. And the woman at table 4 who keeps touching her earring, and the man by the stage door who has been standing in the same spot since before dinner started, and I don't think anyone has talked to him either. Tessa looked at the man by the stage door. He was in a catering uniform, grey-haired, holding a clipboard, looking at a spot on the middle distance. You're right, she said. He's been there since the cocktail hour. Do you think he's all right? I think, Tessa said, that he's the kind of person who knows when the room needs him and when it doesn't, and he's currently in a doesn't stretch. Oliver thought about that, like me. She did not say, oh no, that's not what I meant, the way most adults would have. She looked at him steadily. A little like you, she said, though the difference is that he chose to stand there. You didn't choose this table. Oliver had not expected that. He looked at the centerpiece again, so he did not have to look at her while he decided what his face was doing. My Nan is over there, he said. I see her. She's been talking to that woman for a long time. Yes. A pause. The room was getting louder around the edges as the dinner hour wore on. Someone at the podium was beginning to set up for the next presentation. Are you hungry? Tessa said. A little. She opened the small dark clutch on her lap and took out, to Oliver's considerable surprise, a folded square of wax paper. She opened it on the table between them. Inside were 4 oatmeal cookies, the plain kind, no icing. I have a thing, she said, without apparent embarrassment, about events that run long and only serve things on tiny plates. I brought backup. Oliver looked at the cookies. Did you make them? My neighbor did. She made too many and gave me a container this morning. I took 4. That was good planning. I find it's usually good planning. She nudged the paper toward him. Help yourself. They're not fancy, but they're real. He took one. It was dense and faintly salty and tasted like the kind of thing someone had made by hand, not from a box. She took one too. They sat for a moment eating cookies while a woman at the podium thanked the evening's sponsors. Do you know anyone here? Oliver asked. A few people. I'm here because of the literacy program. I work with it. Not in a fancy way. I do the reading assessments. I test children to see where they are and where they need help. She paused. I'm a teacher, a reading specialist. Primarily, I work with kids who find reading harder than the school expects it to be. What kinds of harder? She looked at him. Most adults did not ask follow-up questions when he asked follow-up questions. They answered the simple version and moved on. All kinds, she said. Some children see letters that move around on the page. Some children can say every word correctly out loud but have no idea what any of it means when they're done. Some children learn to read in one language first and are now learning in a second, and their brain is doing twice the work and nobody is giving them credit for it. Which kind do you see the most? The third kind lately. We're in a city that speaks 140 languages and our testing only comes in 2. She broke a piece off her cookie. It's a problem I'm trying to make louder. Oliver finished his cookie and considered whether to take another. He decided yes. Is that why you're here tonight, to make it louder? She smiled. Not the bright social smile of the adults circulating the room, but a smaller one, the kind that looks like a person being caught telling the truth. That's why I'm here. The foundation funds reading programs. I'm trying to get them to fund a different kind. She did not ask him what school he went to. She said, "What do you like to read?" He told her. He had a great deal to say on this subject, as it turned out, and she listened in the specific way that meant she was actually listening and not just waiting for him to finish. She asked about the books. She remembered details between sentences. When he mentioned that a series he liked had a main character who was sometimes called something different in the British versus the Canadian edition, she said, "That drives me mad too." Publishers making regional decisions about what a child can handle. That's exactly what it is, Oliver said, with the satisfaction of a person whose irritation has been named correctly for the first time. The presentation at the podium had changed speakers. A man in a dark suit was now describing the Foundation's endowment goals with the specific enthusiasm of a person reading a document he has not memorized. Tessa glanced at the stage. Oliver watched her. Are you supposed to be listening to that? He asked. I'm supposed to be at table 11, she said, which is where I was originally seated. But table 11 is against the far wall, and I walked past this one on my way from the corridor, and you were here. Oliver processed this. You stopped on purpose. I stopped because the chair was empty and you were counting the waiters. He looked down at his suit jacket. Could you tell? I spent 15 years watching children count things when they don't know what else to do with their hands. You were counting. What were you on when I got here? 17. She made a small sound that was almost a laugh. 17 in 90 minutes is a quiet room. It didn't feel quiet. No, she said, it wouldn't. There was a small shift in the room then. Not dramatic, not a sudden change of sound, but the kind of shift that happens in a ballroom when a particular set of people move toward the same exit, and the temperature of the room adjusts accordingly. Oliver noticed it because he had been watching the room. Tessa noticed it because she had been watching Oliver. From the far table, a woman in a silver-grey blazer looked up from her conversation. She scanned the room in the practiced way of a person checking on something she has been not quite thinking about, found the small round table near the back and went still. Oliver's grandmother had very blue eyes and the expression of a woman who had just realized with a specific and physical clarity that she had been gone for an hour and 25 minutes. She said something brief to the woman in the red blazer, set her napkin on the table and walked across the room. Oliver watched her come. He did not wave. His grandmother reached the table and set her hand on the back of his chair before she said anything. She looked at Tessa. "I'm so sorry," she said. I turned around and she stopped. She looked at the wax paper, the remaining cookies, the specific angle of the chairs. "Has he been?" "We've been talking about books," Tessa said, "and the tulips. He has some views on publisher decisions that I think are worth hearing." His grandmother looked at him. There was something in her face that was not quite guilt and not quite relief. It was the look of a person who has understood something true about a situation and does not yet know what to do with the understanding. She pulled the chair from across the table around to Oliver's other side and sat down. "I'm Dorothy Ashby," she said, "Oliver's grandmother." "Tessa Okafor. I work with the literacy program, reading assessments primarily. I was at table 11. Was that? I'm here now." Dorothy looked at her grandson. Oliver was very carefully not making eye contact with either of them. "Oliver," Dorothy said, "have you eaten anything?" "2 cookies," he said. "Tessa brought them. They were made by her neighbor." "Your table 11 dinner?" "I ate a few bites between the first and second speakers," Tessa said. "I'll finish it after there's time." Dorothy looked at the wax paper. She looked at the empty champagne glasses on the table, which had never been meant for Oliver but had been placed there because nobody had thought to remove them. She looked at her own face, reflected briefly in the silver of a knife that was pointed the wrong way. "I'll get him a plate," she said, and stood and went to find a waiter, and this time she did not go far enough for Oliver to lose sight of her. While she was gone, Oliver said to Tessa, "She's not usually like that." "I know." She was talking to her friend from the board. They don't see each other very often. "I know," Tessa said again, not dismissively. She said it the way a person says "I know" when they mean "I believe you," and also this is not an excuse you need to make. Oliver picked up the 3rd cookie and broke it in half. He put half back on the paper. "For Nan," he said. Tessa looked at the half cookie for a moment. "You're a kind person," she said quietly. He did not know what to do with that, so he ate his half of the cookie and watched the tulips. When Dorothy came back with a small plate, the waiter had been found. A real plate was on its way. This was a preliminary offering of bread rolls and butter. She sat back down and they were 3 at a table built for 8, which made the table feel, for the first time all evening, like the right size for them. A man appeared near the table. He had come in from the main entrance, moving through the room with the particular economy of a person who has done this kind of room many times and is still not comfortable in it. He had a phone in his hand, and the jacket of a suit that had been put on in a hurry. Oliver saw him first. "That's my dad," he said. Tessa looked. The man was in his early 40s, slightly too tall for the room's proportions, scanning the tables with the face of someone who has received a text message that has changed his evening. "I thought he couldn't come," Oliver said to himself more than anyone. Dorothy raised her hand. The man found them. He threaded through the room without pausing at anyone's elbow. He reached the table and put his hand on Oliver's shoulder first. Then he looked at Dorothy. Then he looked at Tessa. "I'm Rowan Ashby," he said, "Oliver's father." "Tessa Okafor." He looked at the cookies, the angle of the chairs, his son's face. His son's face was the kind of face that told him everything. "I thought you had the Edmonton conference," Dorothy said. "I got on the 7 o'clock, the panel went short." He did not say, "I called 3 times and nobody picked up." He did not say, "I sat in the airport and thought about the last time I missed something." He said, "I'm here now." He pulled a chair over, not from across the table but from the adjacent one, and sat down on Oliver's other side, the side that wasn't Tessa's, so that the boy was between 2 people who had chosen to be next to him. He looked at Tessa again, and she understood that he was trying to read the situation without asking Oliver to explain it. "He's been teaching me," she said, "about a book series where the protagonist has a different name depending on which country you buy it in." Rowan's expression shifted. "The Thornwick books." "The Thornwick books." "He's been furious about that for 3 months." "I can see why. It's a real editorial overreach." Rowan looked at her for a beat. She met the look steadily, the way she had met Oliver's when he'd asked if she'd been listening. He said, "You're with the foundation?" "With the literacy program. I run reading assessments. I'm trying to get funding for a multilingual testing stream. We're currently assessing children in English and French and calling the results universal." She paused. "It isn't." He was quiet for a moment. "I know something about that issue," he said. "I work in education policy." "I know who you are," she said. "You chaired the Provincial Early Literacy Review in March." A beat. "You read it," he said. "I submitted 11 pages of commentary on Section 4. He looked at her. Something happened in his face that was not quite recognition and not quite surprise. It was the expression of a person who has been handed the answer to a question they had not yet managed to articulate. Okafor, he said, the multilingual assessment section. That was me. That section was the reason we extended the comment period by 2 weeks. I know, she said, I asked you to. There was a small silence at the table. Oliver, between them, had been following this exchange with the precise attention of a child who understands that something important is happening, even though it is happening in adult code. He looked at Tessa, he looked at his father. He reached across the table and picked up the remaining half of the cookie, the half he had set aside for his grandmother, and held it out to his father on the flat of his palm. Rowan looked at it, he looked at his son, he looked at where the cookie had come from. He took it, he did not eat it immediately, he held it in his hand. Dorothy said softly, it was the neighbor's. Rowan said, whose neighbor? Oliver said, Tessa's. Rowan looked at Tessa. There was a quality to the look that the room, if it had been paying attention, might have noted and filed away. The room was not paying attention. The room was listening to the third speaker of the evening. But Oliver was paying attention, because Oliver had been paying attention to this room all evening, and what he noticed was that his father was not, for the first time in the last month and a half, pressing his thumb against the face of his watch. He ate the cookie. The presentation on stage moved into the question period. Someone at table 4 asked a long question that was not quite a question. Someone at the podium gave a short answer that was not quite an answer. The tulips leaned another degree. Tessa said quietly to the table in general, the funding application window for the multilingual stream closes on the 30th. It was not said to Rowan. It was not said to Dorothy. It was said to the table in the way someone states a fact that they have been carrying alone for some time and have decided to set down. Rowan said equally quietly, the review panel meets the second week of November. I know. Your commentary was entered into the record. I know that too, it was entered and tabled. He turned his head a degree. It was tabled pending additional stakeholder consultation. That consultation is scheduled for the 22nd. She looked at him. That's not in the public record, she said. No, he said, it isn't. Oliver looked at his father. His father had the expression he got when he was being careful about something. Not careful in a closed way, careful in the way of a person measuring the distance between where he is standing and where he means to go. Dad, Oliver said. Yes. Is the consultation the thing that could actually change it? Rowan looked at his son. What do you know about the consultation? I read your files sometimes, Oliver said. When you leave them open on the kitchen table. A silence. You read my policy files, Rowan said. Some of them are interesting. Tessa was looking at Oliver with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite wonder. It was the expression she wore at the end of a reading assessment, when a child had done something she had not expected and had not taught them to do. The consultation, Rowan said to both of them, is the thing that could actually change it. Yes. Oliver looked at Tessa. You should go to that. I intend to. You should bring the 11 pages. I plan to bring more than 11 pages. He considered this. Good. The evening's formal program ended at 9:45. The room began the slow dissolution that follows every gala, small clusters forming near the exits, coats appearing, the particular gratitude of people saying goodbye to people they will not see again for a year. The waiters moved through the emptying tables with the relieved efficiency of people doing the last hour of a long shift. At the small round table near the back wall, 4 people were still sitting. Dorothy had eaten 3 of the dinner rolls and was on her second cup of tea. Oliver had eaten the proper dinner plate when it finally arrived and was now drawing a small diagram on the back of the program, illustrating what he believed was happening structurally to the tulips. Rowan had his jacket over the back of his chair and was listening to Tessa describe the assessment tool she had designed and piloted in 2 schools in the fall with the focused attention of a man who has forgotten, for the first time in 2 hours, to check his phone. A photographer circled the room on his last pass of the evening. He paused at the head table. He paused at table 11 where the Foundation's board chair was still deep in conversation. He paused at the small round table near the back wall, raised his camera, looked through the lens at the 4 people there. An older woman with a paper teacup, a boy drawing on a program, a man with his jacket off, a woman in a green dress with a few inches of wax paper visible on the table between them, and lowered the camera. He moved on. It was not the photograph for the Foundation's social account. It was not the photograph for anything. He had been wrong about that, though he would not know it until Tuesday. The Foundation's social account posted at 11:15 that night. The image was one from the cocktail hour, Wide, bright, sponsored-looking, the caption read, "An unforgettable evening in support of literacy for all. Thank you to our generous donors and community champions for making tonight possible." Tessa saw it at 6 a.m, standing in her kitchen in her socks waiting for the kettle. She read it twice. She set her phone face down on the counter. She thought, "I am not in that photograph. I am not named in that caption. I was at table 11 and then I was not, and neither of those facts appears anywhere in the public account of last night." She thought, "That is accurate. I was a reading specialist from a school board who had been given a seat because the foundation's outreach coordinator knew her college roommate, and I brought cookies in my clutch because I have done this long enough to know that the speeches go long and the plates come small, and none of that is the kind of detail that belongs in a gala caption." She poured her tea. She thought about Oliver counting to 17. She thought about Rowan Ashby's face when she'd said the name of his report section, and the specific quality of his attention afterward, which was not the attention of a man networking, but the attention of a man paying a debt he has not yet named. She thought about the consultation on the 22nd and the 11 pages and the additional pages she would need to write before then. She picked up her phone. There were 2 text messages she had not seen when she went to sleep. The first was from a colleague named Bryn, who had also been at the gala. "Saw you abandoning table 11. Is everything okay?" The second was sent at 11:58 from a number she did not have saved. "Miss Okafor, this is Rowan Ashby. I found your contact through the Foundation's presenter list. I want to say 2 things. The first, the consultation on the 22nd has 2 remaining spots for community practitioners. I put your name on the list tonight before I left the hotel. The second, when Oliver asked me in the car on the way home what the woman in the green dress was fighting for. I told him, but he said, she should win. He is, as you may have observed, a child with good judgment, Ashby." Tessa read the message standing in her socks with the tea going warm in her hand. She thought about a 7-year-old boy who held out half a cookie on the flat of his palm. She thought about his father holding it and not eating it right away, just holding it. The way a person holds something they have been handed and do not yet know what to do with. She typed, "Mr. Ashby, thank you for the spot on the list. I'll be prepared. Tell Oliver I said he's right about the Thornwick naming situation. The UK edition is called something significantly better, and that's not an opinion, it's a fact. T. Okafor." She set the phone down. She drank her tea. She picked up the draft of the additional pages and read the first paragraph standing at the counter, the same way she had stood in the doorway of her program director's office 18 months ago, when he'd told her the stream was unlikely to get funded in the current cycle, and she had read the first paragraph of her original 11 pages standing in that doorway and thought, "Then I will make it louder." She sat down at her kitchen table. She began. The consultation on the 22nd lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes, which was 40 minutes longer than the agenda indicated, because the panel chair called for an extended comment period after Tessa's presentation, and 3 of the panel members asked follow-up questions, and one of them asked the same follow-up question twice in different language, because she wanted, she said, to make sure she had understood the assessment correctly. She had understood it correctly. Rowan was at the far end of the panel table in the chair reserved for the policy liaison. He did not ask any questions. He was not supposed to. His role in the consultation was observational. He watched Tessa answer the panel's questions with the clean, unhurried patience of a person who has had to explain this to a great many rooms and has decided that this particular room is worth the full explanation. Afterward, in the hallway outside the consultation room, while Tessa was gathering her folders and her bag and the 22 pages she had brought instead of 11, he said, "You went 2 pages over your time limit." The chair gave me the extension. I know, I'm not complaining. She looked at him. He was in the policy meeting version of the same suit he'd worn at the gala, pressed appropriate, the jacket buttoned in the way of a man who keeps himself correctly assembled in professional rooms. Panel member Dumont asked the same question twice, she said. She asks every question twice when she's deciding something. Is that a good sign? In my experience, he said, it is the best sign. Tessa slid the 22 pages into her folder. She did not allow herself to feel anything about that yet. She had learned in 18 months of this not to feel things about signs before they became facts. Oliver's reading assessment, Rowan said, and then stopped. She looked up. He has one scheduled with your program in January, he said. Through the school board. I didn't know when we spoke at the gala that it was your program specifically. I found out from the school last week. She waited. I want you to know that I know that, he said, and that it doesn't change what I put your name on the consultation list for, and it doesn't change what the panel heard today. I want you to know that those are separate. I know they're separate, she said. But I wanted to say it anyway. But she looked at him for a long beat. The hallway was emptying around them, panel members and advisors moving toward the elevator, the particular dispersal of people after a long meeting. But he's going to be fine, she said. Whatever the assessment shows, children who ask the questions he asks are not children who struggle alone. But something shifted in Rowan's face, just slightly. The way a room shifts when someone opens a window you hadn't known was closed. But I know, he said. But I know you know, I'm saying it anyway. But a small silence. Down the hall, someone held the elevator and called his name. He lifted a hand in acknowledgement and did not move. But there's a public reading of new children's releases at the Annex Library on Saturday, he said. Oliver has been talking about going. I thought if you were, not professionally. As a person who has opinions about the Thornwick naming situation and brings cookies to long events. But she looked at the folder in her hands. She thought about good judgment. But what time, she said. At 2 o'clock. They usually run until 4. There's a decent coffee place 2 doors down that Oliver considers acceptable, which I've learned is a meaningful endorsement. But it is a meaningful endorsement, she said. He's a precise critic. But he is. It's occasionally inconvenient and mostly a relief. But she put the folder in her bag. All right, Saturday. But he inclined his head, the small, formal movement of a man who has learned to be careful about what he lets his face do in professional hallways, and walked to the elevator. She watched him go, not because she was waiting to see something, but because the hallway was empty now, except for them, and it seemed like the natural thing after a 3-hour and 40-minute consultation to stand still for a moment. But she went home. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table and did not look at her phone, and did not think about signs that were not yet facts, and did not very deliberately think about the specific quality of the look a man gives a person when he has been paying a debt he hasn't named yet, and is beginning to think about the naming. But she graded 3 assessments, she ate dinner, she went to bed at a sensible hour. But on Saturday she arrived at the Annex Library at 1:55, and Oliver was already there, in the 3rd row, with a seat saved with his jacket on her left and his father on his right, and when she sat down Oliver said, without preamble, "They're reading the new Thornwick today, the Canadian edition. I looked it up this morning and there are 2 name differences from the UK one and I have notes." "But show me," she said. But he showed her. But she read the notes. They were written in his careful 7-year-old hand, organized with a logic that was entirely his own and completely sound. "But these are good notes," she said. "But I know," he said. "I'm going to give them to the publisher." But she did not tell him that was unlikely to work. She said, "I'll help you write the letter." But he looked at her. "Really? But you have a solid argument. It deserves a solid letter." But he turned back to the front of the room where the reader was arranging her pages and said nothing for a moment, in the way children say nothing when they have been given something they were not sure they were allowed to ask for. But beside him Rowan said nothing either. He had been watching his son's face. But he looked after a moment at Tessa. But she was reading Oliver's notes again, her head bent, one hand resting on the back of Oliver's chair. She was not performing attention. She was simply attending. In the specific way she had crouched down at a table near the back wall of a ballroom and looked at a 7-year-old boy with the straightforward regard of a person who had noticed he was carrying something. But he was looking at someone who had sat down in a chair that the evening had not arranged for her, and had not in the weeks since stood up. But he looked at the front of the room the reader had begun. But Oliver's notes were in Tessa's hand. The room settled, the story began. But it was November in a city that had started its slow turn toward winter, and for a few minutes in the 3rd row of a library in the annex, none of them thought about consultations or policy panels or assessments or the publisher decisions of the Thornwick series or anything that did not fit inside the clean small square of the story being read aloud to a room that had, without announcement, decided to listen. But I keep thinking about the cookies. But not in a sentimental way. I mean the actual practical decision to fold 4 oatmeal cookies into a square of wax paper and put them in an evening clutch before a gala. That's not a grand gesture. That's just someone who has been in enough rooms to know that the speeches run long and the plates come small, and who decided quietly to be prepared. That's what I want to talk about. Not the dramatic moments, the quiet preparation that makes the quiet moments possible. But Tessa didn't arrive at that table with a plan. She arrived because she walked past a boy who was counting waiters, and she recognized what that meant. She recognized it because she had spent 15 years in rooms with children who were carrying things nobody was asking them about. Her work had trained her to see it. Her character made her stop. But that's the part that stays with me, the way those 2 things have to work together. You can have all the compassion in the world and still not know what to do with it if you haven't also done the work. And you can have all the knowledge and skill and still walk past a child at a table of 8 because the room has made it easy to look somewhere else. Tessa had both, and she used both, and the result was 4 cookies on a wax paper square and a chair pulled to exactly the right angle. But Oliver, at 7 years old, understood something that a lot of adults take decades to learn, which is that a good argument deserves a good letter. He had notes. He had organized them with his own logic. He wasn't waiting for permission to care about something. He was already doing the work of caring, carefully and specifically, in a hotel ballroom where no one had thought to lower a tray to his height. That kind of intelligence doesn't come from being told to pay attention. It comes from a child who was never made to feel that his attention didn't count for something. And Rowan is the one I find most honest to sit with, because he did everything right structurally. He flew back early, he walked across the room, he ate the cookie, he put her name on the consultation list that same night. But the thing that actually mattered was the moment before all of that, the moment he understood from the look on his son's face that showing up early once did not make up for the pattern that had made the empty seat feel normal. He didn't argue with that, but he didn't explain it away, he just sat down and stayed. But I think that's what perseverance actually looks like most of the time. Not the dramatic return, the staying after the return, the Tuesday consultations and the Saturday library rows and the letters to publishers that probably won't work but deserve to be written anyway. What this story keeps asking me is whether I'm the person who notices the chair is empty or the person who decided someone else had already handled it. The honest answer changes depending on the week. But I think the question is worth asking regularly, not because the answer makes you a good or bad person, but because the asking is what keeps you from walking past 17 times without stopping. Oliver saved half a cookie for his grandmother before he knew she was coming back. That's the whole thing right there. That's who you're trying to be.